So the other day, someone sent me a PDF that I had to quote unquote sign. This is really the modern day equivalent of sending someone a fax. It's just ridiculously anachronistic and overcomplicated. But it spawned an idea, which was to create this page here, which would allow me to generate signatures as images that I could then upload into the PDF. So let's see, we can put my Benjamin Nadel, and you can see here we have a variety of signature styles. These are coming from the handwritten Google Fonts category. And there's a download button, and what this is going to do is use the html2canvas library to generate a transparent PNG of the particular image. Let's go ahead and just pick one. I kind of like this chunky one right here. Let's hit download. You'll see it downloads as signature 2. Let's open this up. And you can see here is my chunky signature. Just as a showcase, let's try a script one so we can see that it's actually working. And here we get our script one as well. Now I have a blank PDF that I generated, and we can get this into the PDF. Again, it's more complicated than it has to be. This is using the Mac preview app. Other apps make this a lot easier, but essentially I can copy it and then paste it, and then I can copy it again and then paste it here, and it pastes all the way down at the bottom for some reason. You can see here's my signature. Let's try it and do this one. Let's do a copy paste, and then let's copy and paste, and you'll see now I have my scripty one. You can resize it. Of course, the idea here being that you would overlay this into an official document, and you'd put this where your signature has to go. Okay, so how does this work? I mentioned that I'm using Google Fonts, and I'm also using the html2canvas library. So let's take a look at what's happening under the hood. Well, actually, before we do that, I just want to show some other stuff. So you can change the slant here. So I can slant it forward. I can slant it back. We can also start to play around with the letter spacing. So right now there's no spacing. I can expand it. I can condense it. So you can start to try to generate a signature that looks more or less in alignment with the kind of signature you would have in real life. All right, groovy. Let's take a look at what's going on under the hood. It ends up actually being fairly simple. But first, let's open up my fonts file. So the first thing I did in this project is I went to Google Fonts and I looked at their handwritten category, and then I just looked for fonts that more or less look like they would make for pleasant signatures. The href here is what we would normally put in our link tag. The family here is what I'm going to apply in the style attribute of the signature. And then the adjust size is essentially to try and create fonts that more or less render at the same size. Every font family renders at a ridiculously inconsistent size for a given pixel height. So I'm allowing fonts to be adjusted up and down so that they roughly all look kind of the same size when they're rendered here on the page, and therefore when they're rendered as a PNG by the html2canvas library. So once I have this file in place, let's now jump back into our HTML. Forms, nothing very interesting there. You can see it's really just translating some CSS stuff. Here's the degrees for the skewing. Here's some pixels for the letter spacing. We're going to dynamically generate all of our signature options into this main area. And we're going to do that using this template. So a template essentially is a chunk of your HTML page that is referenceable in the document object model, or the DOM, but is not rendered implicitly to the output, which allows us to take this, clone it, and then stamp out those clones and apply them to the document. All right, so we have our template, we have our main. Let's now go ahead and jump into the JavaScript. And I'll just say that we assume here that the fonts file, that's my collection of fonts that we just looked at, is already included by the time this executes. So there's no dynamic loading, no like system import or anything like that. This is all just synchronous execution of code. Let's jump down to some of the interesting stuff. So first, we want to take the fonts and we want to add them to the document. So this is essentially just going to loop over that array of fonts, and it's going to generate those link tags and apply them to the page, right? So if we jump back here and we look at our Element Explorer and we go up, Element Explorer, and we go up into our head tag, you can see that I've generated all of the links for these fonts. Nicely done. All right, and then what do we do after that? We add our signatures to the document. That's where we're going to take that template element and we're going to stamp it out. So let's jump down to that. So we find our main element on the page. We find our template. That's the thing we're going to clone. Then we're going to loop over our fonts. We're going to find the content of the template and we're going to deep clone it. then we're going to set that up as a fragment. So we're going to wrap it in Umbrella.js. Just Umbrella provides a really nice Fluent API inspired by jQuery, but a fraction of the size. Really, it's a very nice API to have at your disposal. And you'll see that here with the way we can able to manipulate this fragment quite easily. We're going to find the signature element inside, right? So if we jump back to our HTML, that's this element inside of our template here. This is the thing that's going to actually hold the signature. This is also the DOM node that we're going to render with the html2canvas library. So we come back here, we're going to apply a title so that we can see what font family we are. Right? If I hover over this and pause, you'll see that's the Sacramento font. This is the Miss Maddie font. So my glasses aren't on. And then I'm going to apply that font family to the signature. And then I'm going to start with a base size of 30 pixels. And you can see here's where the adjustment, where I adjust the size of the fonts up and down to try and get them roughly the same height. Now you'll notice that all I'm doing in the inline CSS is applying the family and the size, but I'm not applying the slant or the condensed nature, the letter spacing. And that's because we don't have to do that on a signature specific basis. We can do that across the entire set of signatures, unlike the font family, which is specific to a given signature. And the way that we do that is if we look in our CSS for a second, if we look at the HTML, the root element here, you'll see that we actually have some CSS custom properties, sometimes referred to as CSS variables. And we have one here for letter spacing and skew. And then if we jump down to our signature, what you'll see in our signature is we're going to render the letter spacing and the transform here by evaluating those CSS custom properties. So essentially we're inheriting the letter spacing and skew value from that root element. And then what happens is when you change the form, what we do is we change the value applied to that root element, and that immediately cascades down to all of the signatures. And we can see that in a minute, but let's just jump back into our index here. So we stamp out that DOM element, and then we append it to the document, and that's how we get all of our pretty signatures here based on our fonts. All right, so what else is interesting? So let's look at the applying forms that we were just talking about. So every time if we jump, let's jump to where this is being called. So you'll see here that I have my name input, my slant, my spacing input, and those are all going to apply the form values to the DOM and back to the URL, but that's not really that interesting. So if we look here, when we want to apply the slant and the letter spacing to the document, all we do is we get the form values and we go to our root element, that's our HTML element, and we update the custom CSS properties there, skew and letter spacing. Again, that immediately cascades down to the rest of the document. Then we get the name value, and we apply that to the text property, the inner text property of all of the name labels. And you'll see with our name labels here, all we did is look for all of the version signature. And again, this is really just where that Umbrella/jQuery Fluent API comes in handy. It just makes working with the DOM so much easier than having to deal with vanilla JavaScript. We could do it with vanilla JavaScript, and we could do it with the vanilla DOM API, but why? It's just, there's no point to it. So this finds all of the elements that have the signature. This gives us the collection, and then you can see in order to apply the text to that collection, all I do is call text. I don't have to iterate. Umbrella is doing that for me. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So now the piece de resistance, the reason that we're here, generating those PNGs. How do we actually do that? With the html2canvas library, this is stupid easy. I can't even, it's like the simplest part of this entire demo is actually the generation of the PNG. So again, if we jump into our initialization code, we have our download button. So this is going to get a collection of all of the download buttons, and then we're going to wire up this handle download click. And if we jump down to that, this right here, can I get it all on one screen? This right here is the entirety of the logic it takes to generate those PNGs. Super, super simple. So someone clicks on a download button. I get the target of that click event, which is going to be the download button. In this case, I'm going to go up to the .version, and that is going to be the parent here of the cloned element. I'm going to find the signature. So that's going to be the actual element, right? If we zoom in here, again, that's going to be the actual element that contains, let me just zoom into this one. the signature. And it's important that this is a non-block element, or I should say it's important that it's not a full width element, because when you call the html2canvas library, it will render the actual dimensions of the DOM element. So I needed this to be something that was hugging the signature, and you can see it's just around the signature with a padding, I think, of 10 pixels. So we get that signature element. We get the underlying DOM node. That's what first does in Umbrella.js. So now we have our node, our raw DOM node that contains the signature that we want to render to an image. And all we do is call this html2canvas. We pass in that node I was just talking about some render options. Specifically in this case, the important one is we want to have a background color of null. That will keep the canvas transparent, which we need because when we want to generate the PNG, we want that PNG to easily overlay other elements that are already in the PDF. We don't want to have a big blocky white background color. So we call this renders that DOM element into the canvas by redrawing all of the properties. It's frankly magical as far as I'm concerned. That resolves eventually, giving us the canvas object. And then all we're going to do is generate a temporary anchor tag, grab the data URI from the canvas, put it as the href. Now, then we apply the download attribute with the file name. The download attribute essentially tells the browser, don't navigate to this thing. You're not allowed to actually navigate to a data URI. Don't navigate to this. Instead, prompt the user to download it and save it as a local file. Then we add that to the body. We simulate a click, and then we remove it because we no longer need it. And it's the simulating of the click plus the download attribute which causes this PNG to be downloaded to the user's browser. Right? And if we do this one more time, you can see we get our prompted download. And there we go. And then we can pull it into here, and then we could export this as a PDF or flatten it as a PNG. It's I don't know, it's pretty exciting. I'm blown away that this html2canvas call, it's so simple and it's so powerful, and I literally can't believe that it happens whenever it happens. It just works like magic. And this was just a lot of fun to write. And when I first approached it, I kind of wanted to use Angular. I kind of wanted to try and use Vue, but then I decided just to use the native template element. And you can see it actually comes out to be fairly simple. It would have been kind of nice to have some sort of a repeater here where I didn't have to do the cloning. But in the end, I mean, you know, we're talking about less than 160 lines of code here with ample Ben style commenting. And it does some pretty cool stuff. So anyway, I hope you found this as enjoyable as I found it.